Good afternoon to everybody. Good morning, good evening, good night. Thank you for making the opportunity to be with us today to this very important occasion to celebrate and to launch this very important book that has already been in the I wouldn't say in the market, has been with us, within the knowledge production field. Some of us have already consumed the contents of this book, and we are hoping that today the editors and the authors would speak, to some of the key aspects of this book, which will allow us to continue with the work. So on behalf of the Global Africa Group of the World University Network, I want to welcome you to this important occasion. We are going to proceed straight to this book entitled Africa and the Sustainable Development Goals, which is co-edited by Mano Ramutsindela of the University of Cape Town and also David Mickler. We're going to start by asking Peter Laney from the World University Network, to introduce and welcome people to this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Divine. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. I'm honored and delighted to introduce this celebration to launch Africa and the Sustainable Development Goals. From the perspective of the Worldwide Universities Network, the Global Africa Group has achieved several firsts, culminating in the publication of the book. I'd like to review these firsts in turn, because they say a lot about the value of the international collaborations that WUN encourages and supports. The first is the Global Africa Group's early recognition of the profound importance of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, not just as aspirations, but as a powerful organizing framework for bringing people together to deal with genuinely important research problems. WUN has at times struggled to identify the kinds of research problems it can pursue with real distinction. And over the past couple of years, we've looked at where WUN can best add value in promoting collaborative research among partners. We've concluded that the key lies in taking on problems where the geographical and cultural diversity of the member universities confers real advantage. That is, we should invest in problems that benefit from a comparative approach empowered by the diversity of the network. The SDGs are immensely rich in problems of this kind, and for that reason, sustainable development has become the focus of WUN's current strategic plan. The Global Africa Group was, of course, far out in front on this, and was an important inspiration as we thought through the larger strategy. The second first is in demonstrating how a successful multilateral collaboration should work. The diversity of collaborating researchers and institutions can be an enormous benefit, but it can also be an enormous problem if the participants don't fully recognize, understand, and deal with differences among them in resources and histories. The Global Africa Group, bringing together more than 80 authors from 29 universities, plus some other research institutions, on 5 continents, has exemplified what can be achieved when collaborating researchers make the very best use of what everyone brings to the partnership. That's a really important achievement. And the final first is that the Global Africa Group has delivered the fruits of the collaboration in a compelling book that's guaranteed to be influential. It will be a potent model for other WUN projects as they consider how best to ensure their impact. My congratulations to you all.
Thank you, Peter, for that introduction. It is indeed a collaboration and a first, and we're really excited that this has been possible within the Global Africa Group. I am going to ask the editors of this book, to speak to this book, to its key arguments, to why we should read this book and why this book is so important at this particular moment, and also why some of us skeptics about SDGs, should take this book really seriously. So I'm going to ask Professor Mano Ramutsindela of the University of Cape Town and also David Mickler of the University of Western Australia to speak to the book. Mano, what do you?
Okay, thank you very much, and hello everyone. Thank you for joining us in celebrating the launch of this book. It has taken us some time to put this book together, but the gist of the book is thinking about sustainable development goals and African development goals and needs. What the book does is to place these development goals within the current conditions in Africa, with a view to understand what is the current constraints and opportunities for development on the African continent. We have to know what is prevailing on the ground before we can understand how the sustainable development goals are going to unfold. Our view is that sustainable development goals are not written on a blank map on Africa. There's something that has been going on for ages. And in order to grapple with these questions, we decided to develop 5 themes in order to organize our knowledge and evidence of what is happening on the ground and our thinking about sustainable development goals within the African context. The first theme deals with a theoretical question of the SDGs as development agendas at the time when Africa has its own agenda, the AU Agenda 2063. Incidentally, these 2 agendas came together at the same time in 2015. And the book does trace the development of these agendas in their different pathways in order to understand whether they complement each other or they are in competition. There is evidence that the 2 development goals have used different pathways, but they have got synergies. But they also have different ideological orientations. For example, the AU is oriented towards a Pan-Africanism and African identity, whereas the SDGs have their orientation as a global governance. So we deal with this theme using different perspectives to understand where the debate is going. We also set the debate in the chapters. The second theme has to do with the SDGs and the political economy of Africa's natural resources. This is a key theme for Africa because natural resources are not only important for the African people, but they also fuel the global economy. So the question that we ask is how Africa's natural resources that are important for the global economy will be useful for Africa's development. Is the world economy going to make use of these resources to achieve the kinds of development goals that the world needs? Will there be competition between Africa's needs and the capitalist global economy? That is the question that we grapple with in theme 2. We also recognize that resource sovereignty is still not achieved within the African continent. And the potential for Africa's development relies very much on these resources. The third theme has to do with institutions of higher learning. And here, this is where networks become important, such as the Worldwide Universities Network that bring universities together to work on research agendas. But how does universities play their role in these networks to achieve sustainable development goals? The chapters in the book do relate to the role of universities in curriculum development to shape the thinking of the new generation of scholars into understanding developmental goals. But it's also the curriculum that should move away from how we understand development on the African continent. We need to use institutions of higher education to develop a knowledge base that we can rely on to move Africa forward. What is also critical is whether the SDGs help redefine the role of universities on the African continent. And the role of universities are important because they've changed over time. The fourth theme deals with constraints and opportunities. SDGs brings with them some opportunities that can be a guide for economic and development policy, that can push governments who have been reluctant to tackle poverty to think about programs differently. But there are constraints, and the major one is the global economy that has perpetuated inequalities. And I don't think that it's going to be easy for us to stop that perpetuation. Now, the question, of course, that we grapple with is whether the SDGs are also pushing Africa into a type of economic development that feeds into the kinds of economy that the world is moving towards? Or is it an opportunity for Africa to define its own economic growth? The fifth theme has to deal with climate and human relations and the environment. And that's quite an important part because the global environmental crisis poses serious challenge to the world as a whole, but to Africa in particular. How are we going to use Africa's resources and knowledge base to deal with these environmental questions? We also realize in many of the chapters that efforts to tackle environmental problems might actually compromise some of the developmental needs and aspirations that societies in Africa have. There are chapters that deal with the past and present environmental conditions. And as we think through them, we begin to understand that there's so much to learn from how African environments have changed over time and how people have adapted to those changes, and to use that knowledge to think about the future as the climate change is creating new conditions that we need to deal with. In short, these are 5 themes that we deal with in the book. And we don't always agree on everything in the book. Chapters are independently written, and they speak to these issues from different perspectives and also different disciplinary background. I hope you'll enjoy this book. If you haven't bought a copy, I invite you to do so. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Mano, and it's great to see everyone here from Perth, Australia, late in the evening here. But I hope it's a good day for you elsewhere. I just wanted to say a few things about the process for developing the book and the methodology that we adopted to develop the project. And it really starts with our creation of the Global Africa Group within the Worldwide Universities Network. The book is very much a project of that Africa Group that we created in the network. The group was established in late 2015 and was launched in the middle of 2017 at the University of Ghana. And we really wanted this group to embody certain principles of governance at the core of the group that would really structure the way we understood the relationship between global Africa, which is in the title. And so first of all, the group was to be co-chaired. So myself and Mano were the initial co-chairs. We now have Divine and Isabella as co-chairs. But we also wanted to define what we meant by global Africa in the Global Africa Group. And what we meant by that was global Africa collaborations are defined as collaborations that have relevance for Africa's research and development agendas, are linked to international debates and scholarship, and involve dynamic and equal partnerships between what had been the 3 African and 20 non-African universities in the network, the Worldwide University Network, in the setting of research priorities and in co-designing and co-producing research projects. So that was kind of our underlying principle. We wanted to work at the intersection of the SDGs, African development agendas, as well as the existing expertise within this global network. So we developed a number of research priority themes, which really looked at that intersection that brought together the expertise as well as the areas in which we could collaborate. We also wanted to ensure that we promoted inclusion, including of early career academics. And then we wanted to come up with a model that would facilitate the leadership of the 3 African university members, University of Ghana, University of Nairobi, and University of Cape Town. And to do this, we established what we called regional research hubs, one in West Africa, one in East Africa, and one in Southern Africa. And we based our work around these hubs. So the book very much emerged out of that context, and we developed this project through a series of workshops over the period from 2017, 2018, 2019, through a workshop at the University of Ghana, another workshop at the University of Cape Town, a public forum here in Perth on the theme of Africa and development agendas, and then a final workshop at the University of Nairobi looking at SDGs, looking at the relationship between research and policy impact in East Africa. So the book was developed in a highly collaborative fashion. We had a number of principles around how we wanted to produce this book. Again, we wanted it to be a product of collaboration. So each chapter had to be co-authored by at least 2 people. One of the co-authors, or at least one of the co-authors, had to be based at an African university. And at least one of the co-authors had to be based at a WUN university, given that the project was very much of the network. We also promoted overall gender balance and balance between early career and more senior academics. A number of the co-authors are part of this Zoom today. I can see some of the names there, so it's great to see some of the co-authors participating as well. And we asked them essentially to tell us how their research intersects with one or more of the SDGs. So it was a very bottom-up process in our call for chapter abstracts. We asked them broadly to fit into one of 3 thematic areas: Africa's sustainable development approaches, institutions, agendas. That's part 1 of the book. Secondly, scientific evidence and critical thinking on the SDGs. That's part 2. And thirdly, Africa and the SDGs, the role of collaborative research. And so from that process, we ended up with 81 different co-authors from a range of different disciplines, a range of different institutions, countries, and in 26 chapters. So it's a very large, diverse project, multilateral project, as Divine mentioned. And we believe that this is a really great model for collaborative research. So I really do encourage you to read it and engage with both the themes, but also the methodology that we used to develop it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, David and Mano, for that really important introduction. We're going to ask 2 of the authors to speak, to their chapters and also the experience of being part of this really important transnational collaborative process. So we're going to ask Dorcas Osei-Osafu from the University of Ghana and Bernard Kuluhoma from the University of Nairobi.
Thank you, Divine, for the opportunity. So our chapter is titled Making North-South Collaborations Work, Facilitating Natural Product Drug Discovery in Africa. So basically, the chapter is a reflection by the authors on our experiences in North-South collaborations involving natural product drug discovery in Africa. The realization of universal health coverage is highly dependent on Africa's ability to respond appropriately and timely to its huge disease burden. Now, while the chapter focuses largely on SDG 3, which is good health and well-being, there are also strong references to SDG 4, which is on quality, SDG 9, which is on infrastructure and logistics, and then SDG 10, which is on reduced inequalities. Now, we argue that the collaborations that we have been engaged so far have produced undeniable benefits. The nature of funding models employed, however, we think is flawed. And this is shaped to a large extent by the research priorities of the host funding bodies, which are basically based in the global north. Our quest mainly is for genuine collaborations and equitable sharing of resources to address a number of critical points. And these are, we look forward to the fact that there will be extension of the current focus on skill transfer to African scientists to include building and maintenance of sustainable infrastructure. And we also wish that these North-South collaborative bids should be structured in a manner to emphasize the need for scientific research into problems that are defined by the African scientists themselves, and that these research ideas address local, national, or regional needs. We also expect that African governments should significantly complement the support of the global north in their commitment to research in drug discovery and development on the continent, because there's ample demonstration of research outcomes and outputs that should convince our governments that investment in science and human resource is critical to the attainment of the SDGs. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. We contributed to the second part of the book on scientific evidence and critical thinking on the SDGs in Africa, and specifically chapter 11, where we wrote about prioritizing health systems to achieve SDGs in Africa. So it's a review of scientific evidence. Sustainable Development Goals provide a framework for streamlining efforts towards achieving global development objectives. The third SDG aims to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being at all ages, and acknowledges good health as a universal and fundamental human right across the life course. SDG 3 remains an important international priority. So we posit that the central role of health in sustainable development is incontestable as both a determinant and an outcome of progress in other development sectors. So several SDGs, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 11, 13, and 16 also inherently contain health-related targets. And in our chapter, we examine scientific evidence to infer priorities from African states that could inform the direction and implementation of SDG 3 in Africa. A one-size-fits-all approach would be impractical in giving recommendation for improvements. Therefore, it's hoped that the analysis presented in our chapter provides a rapid assessment overview of the prerequisites for strengthening health information and human resource for health across Africa with relevance to the SDG 3 targets. And therefore, it would be able to fit different settings, for example, areas experiencing conflict and ongoing disease and outbreaks, for example, COVID-19. Just to re-emphasize, the WHO describes a framework that classifies health systems into 6 building blocks. So health services, health information, health workforce, medical supplies, financing, and governance. Our chapter identifies priority areas with specific SDG targets from a health systems perspective, and examines 2 components. So that's health information systems and human resources for health. It focuses on the shortfalls and highlights strategies to strengthen these systems and promote sustainable capacity building. Health information systems constitute the evidence base that drives health-related decision-making across all the 6 blocks that I just mentioned. And human resources for health, without which inputs for establishing good health information systems would be impossible to achieve. So we conclude that improvements in health information system and adequate capacity building will undoubtedly highlight key silences and obstacles in SDG 3 actualization and inform help policymakers, practitioners, and researchers on innovative strategies for better health in African countries. Thanks.
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you, Dorcas, and thank you, Manu and David, all authors and contributors. I'm going to hand over to Isabella Abuderi, who is my co-chair, the person with whom I've taken over from David and Manu in the Global Africa Group. She's going to coordinate the Q&A.
Thanks very much, Divine. So let me start with the first one, and I think this would probably go first of all to you, Manu, and you, David. There is a view that the Sustainable Development Goals and the framework around them is an extension of the colonial project. I think this view is quite widely held in different quarters, and it would be interesting to hear your perspectives or your response to that particular view.
Thanks, Isabel, and the question is quite pertinent, and there is a phrase we use in the book, which is suspicious development goals. When we had a a seminar at the University of Western Australia, one of the audience asked that question. And it really challenged us as editors about what the SDGs are. And that is why we wanted to trace where they come from. I'm of the view that African development policies and agendas have long been driven from outside. And so there is good reason why these global sustainable development goals will be treated with a lot of caution. So we needed to look at how were Africans involved in developing these goals. There is a view that the SDGs were much more open in how they were conceptualized. Actually, we can trace them from Mexico. Where this idea was first suggested, and whether that idea was hijacked over time to try and impose certain conditions on countries, on former colonies, so to speak, was a particularly interesting question for us as editors. But we also do realize that the African agenda is now also being pegged against the SDGs. So there is a recognition that some of the things are common. I did refer to ideological orientations, and I think those remains different, and whether they will have implications that are similar to colonial development policies, we still have to see that. But we think that there is a way in which this global energy can be harnessed to help propel what Africans themselves have always wanted to do. And they can choose which development goals they want to pursue. I don't think that the African countries should be, and governments should be compelled to do what they are not supposed to do. Actually, there is a bit of an irony in African development thinking, and the idea of the African state, which we do reflect on here, and we refer to Mkandawire, who summarized it very nicely, that we have a development goal that is supposed to be driven by the state, and yet people don't believe that the African state is capable enough to drive them. So there's a contradiction there in terms. But to answer the question directly, I think there are elements of control, especially in resources, which I think will be difficult to manage. And we know that colonialism has thrived through the control of resources. And that is why even in the first chapter, we do refer to resource sovereignty, which is a constraint to sustainable development goals. There are areas, though, that I think are an opportunity for Africans to do whatever they have desired to do for a long time, and to use the resources available to do that. The AU Agenda 2063 should be our guiding framework in engaging with the SDGs. And if the AU agenda is controlled or taken over, and indeed we can say, this is a colonial project, but I don't think the AU will agree to that. That's my preliminary comments, and I'll be happy to come back if needs be. Thank you.
Thanks, Mano. I'll just add briefly to that. The chapter that I actually co-authored with a colleague of mine in South Africa was actually looking at the question of governance, and particularly around SDG 16 on issues of justice and institutions and governance, as well as SDG 17 on global collaboration. And what we found in understanding the role that African governments played in the development of the SDGs was that, first of all, it was more influential role than had been played in the MDGs, for example, but that African governments had continued to assert that when we're talking about questions of governance in the SDGs, it's not just about the reform of governance within African countries, it's actually about reform of global governance. So they continued to link any reform that was coming down, pressure for reform from the global system was reflected back to say, we also need reform of governance at the international level, so that it's more equitable, so that it's more sustainable, so that different voices are heard. It's not the same voices that have been controlling the development agenda for a long time. So that was, I think, seen as, from the African Union's point of view and from a number of African governments' points of view, a partial victory, at least, in having more influence in the development of SDGs, and hence aligning them more closely with the Agenda 2063.
Thank you very much, David and Manu. So we have another question here. Are there any plans to translate the findings of the book chapters for policymakers and to promote policy engagement with these findings? And I would say this is a question in particular for Dorcas and for Bernard, who spoke specifically around issues concerning SDG 3. So maybe you first, Dorcas, and then you, Bernard.
So yes, regarding policy, we hope, so of course, when we carry out our research activities, the first idea is to publish or patent the findings. But of course, once this is published, then we realize that whether intentionally or consciously, the findings are going to find their way into policy briefs, which eventually should impact community. So my area of research is drug discovery. And since Africa bears a huge chunk of the disease burden, and ironically, Africa is also endowed with natural resources, which we think have not been largely explored, then we wish to press that the findings from our research should go into developing our natural resources to target the diseases that plague us. So yes, eventually the findings should actually be implemented in policy.
Thanks for the question. I would like to probably add to what Dorcas has just said. So the book chapters, or specifically speaking to the book chapter that we've written, is in such a manner that it's easy to understand and easy to translate into policy and policy briefs by the stakeholders. But having said that, yes, it would be critical to disseminate it further and also write executive summaries and policy briefs that could be easily acted upon. So I think it's a good idea.
Thank you very much, Bernard. So we still have very few questions coming in, but again, there was one from the panel, and it's the question around the immense amount of solidarity that will be needed from countries within the continent as well as outside of Africa to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. I would say probably in particular now in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis globally. And the question is, what could academia do to enhance this process? Maybe I will direct this question again, first of all to Manu and then to David.
Thank you, Isabel. I think solidarity will be important to achieve these goals. So what the goals do is to encourage countries to look at specific problems together. And one would imagine that a topic or a challenge such as peace and security on the continent, which is quite high on the SDGs, will also mean that the international community could be mobilized to assist in achieving that goal, which is also key for the AU Agenda 2063. So the solidarity among African countries themselves is a key factor in how the continent could move forward in addressing the SDGs. They are such that even within the country, you need to mobilize civil society and governments to see things differently and to work together to achieve these goals. What perhaps is critical is, what are the conditions that will really help African countries to move towards this solidarity. We know politically that it has worked to achieve liberation, and we need to find strategies to see how it works to achieve these goals.
Thanks, Manu, and thanks for the question. I think we're in a very dangerous time in some ways because of the situation with COVID and obviously the economic and social and political fallout and transformations that we're still seeing playing out from that. But one of the most dangerous tendencies is the inwards turn that we're seeing many countries take away from the idea of global collaboration and solidarity, and particularly around the use of resources. That, you know, as resources are being transformed because of the situation we're in, a lot of pressure is being put on using those resources nationally or locally within particular countries rather than thinking beyond that. So one of those impacts would be that the SDGs is not given the kind of priority that it may or may not have had beforehand. But at the same time, I think it might be creating new opportunities for collaboration, certainly online. We're all adjusting to that form of collaboration, which opens up participation to people who may, previously have not been able to participate. Enables new forms of solidarity, perhaps, or an acceleration of those kinds of development of solidarity. So there's countervailing tendencies, I think, that we're seeing at the moment. Some you could read as being, in a very pessimistic way, potentially a complete turnaround from the idea of global solidarity. But in another way, new forms of solidarity, new potentials. And so it'll be interesting to see how we can take advantage of those opportunities.
Thank you very much, David. A question has come in about the production of the book, and someone has remarked on how impressed they've been by the integrity of the production of the book as a model of genuine global and particularly global North-South collaboration. And the question is, what lessons can be applied to collaboration in the wider world of research from this project? And maybe a more specific question is, what lessons have you as authors drawn from the collaboration on this book that you're going to apply to your cooperation with others going forward? And maybe Dorcas and Bernard, I could direct that question to you.
Okay, so I worked with a couple of colleagues, and we worked together with our graduate students on our research activities. So mainly, when we have a research idea and we want to embark upon it, we tend to write research proposals to seek for grant support. And the Global North has been our strongest financier in this respect. Now, for this particular project, so there were authors from the University of Ghana and the University of Cape Town. So this was South-South. So within that collaboration between the University of Ghana and then South Africa, that alone was an opportunity for us to come together within Africa, because the realization is that we tend to collaborate more out with the North than within the continent. So this was an opportunity for us to come together within the continent to find our strengths within. And if we're able to do this more often, then I believe that we could pull these strengths together, and that alone should be able to propel us and also to showcase to the African governments that if we are able to get the requisite support from them, we would move forward in our agenda to achieve the 17 goals.
Bernard, what about your reflections on this question?
Right, maybe I'll just add on to what Dorcas has said. So it provided very unique and rare opportunities for us to come together and work, and provided an opportunity to work with members of academia, other researchers, and from within our institutions and also outside our institution, and most importantly for me, with individuals from across disciplines as well. And this has enabled us to have ongoing collaborative efforts in that respect. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Another question has come in. Given that the making of this book has been such a successful process, do you see a need and possibilities for a follow-up similar kind of book in future? And if so, what could be possible foci and emphases for this book?
Okay, thanks. I think the art of writing is that when you finish the book, you feel that you haven't said it all. But there's always a time limit on these kind of projects. So we didn't plan to write a follow-up book on this, and I think there's a need for many other resources that should build on this book. I think this is a foundation on which the Global Africa Group could do some more targeted themes to keep the discussions and debates going. It's a challenge for the new co-chairs and the people leading the group to do that. But I certainly think that there are so many other books that can flow from this. Not just books, but engaging with things that that matter for the future of the continent and the world. And there are some such themes that can be developed further into second editions and so forth. I don't know, maybe David, you have more energy to launch another book.
Thanks, Manu. Well, I think the work of the Global Africa Group is continuing. Obviously, with COVID, that's been difficult. But what I think is really important is that the new chairs, the co-chairs, and the new committee have what they've really taken from this project is that you need to put the principles at the heart of the work that you do. So a critical reflection on this interface between global Africa, which, as I mentioned earlier, underpins this book. That kind of critical reflection on that interface is what I think can spur a whole range of follow-on projects and so on. Because it's an ongoing discussion of what that interface is and what those relationships are. So I would strongly encourage the group to continue to engage around that series of principles. And what we also learned was the value of an international research network in being able to bring together a very large-scale project like this in really a 2-year period. Probably not possible to do that outside of an established network. And so what we learned was the value that is added by being part of an international research network, as long as those principles are embedded in what we're trying to do. Thanks.
Thanks very much, David. I will hand back to Divine for wrapping up the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabella, and thank you, colleagues. This has been really useful and productive. I hope that we all had an opportunity, to obtain a teaser to what this important project is about. The Global Africa Group of the World University Network is committed to continuing with this project. For those who are asking questions about the next step, we have developed a strategic plan which builds on this particular project on SDGs, but focusing particularly on how to do a collaborative work and how to develop common methodologies, to deal with the kind of inequalities in knowledge production that are raised, especially in the introduction to that book, which you have framed. There are a series of activities that we are going to be carrying in the next months and in the next 3 years or so. Some that are open workshops, some closed workshops, but which we're going to open up and invite people to participate, and also to have an opportunity to also meet some of the authors and contributors to this book. I am going to move towards closing by just asking Manu and David and also Dorcas and Bernard, if there is one thing you want us to take away from this book today, what would that be? Manu.
Okay, I would say that the book invites us to be critical of SDGs, even as we try to implement them, so that we don't repeat the mistakes of development policies that have wreaked havoc on the continent. And so that's quite important. I wouldn't like the polarization of views in between those who say don't do anything about SDGs, and those who say the SDGs are everything we need to do. I think we need to remain scholars and be reflective about SDGs. Thank you.
Thanks. I would also like to see it used in teaching and engaging the next generation of students and scholars in these kind of questions. And I had the privilege of speaking in one of my colleagues' units, Professor Petra Chackert's unit on the SDGs this semester, and it was great to be able to speak to the book within the class context. So I encourage others to do that as well. Thanks.
Yeah, so for me, I would say that the takeaway from the book is to pursue African solutions to African problems. Thank you.
I would say the SDGs are achievable and greatly overlap the AU Agenda 2063. And it's actually possible to achieve most of the key components set out.
Thank you. Peter, 1 minute to close.
Just again to congratulate the group on doing something that nobody's been able to do before. It's been clear from this discussion, you've managed to break many taboos, you've managed to create something that is exemplary in the way you've approached it and ought to be, I'm sure will be, followed by others as a model for how to proceed in dealing with really complex problems that involve collisions of culture, geography, and history. So congratulations again.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, colleagues. On behalf of Susan Jim, Vilna Venter, Driana, Isabella, the Global Africa Group, and the World University Network, I want to thank you all for having set aside time to participate, in this launch, and we look forward to including you in a lot of our activities. Please follow the WUN, its website, and also the Global Africa Group and its activities. So thank you, and have a nice day or a good night for those who are going to sleep, and good afternoon for those who are having an afternoon, and a wonderful day for those who are still waking up. So, thank you.
Goodbye.